All right. Dude, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Like, I'm really excited.
No problem. Thanks for having me. I listened to the first one and the second episode, and it, like I said, it reminded me so much of when we used to hang out and the conversations that we used to have. I got
Mhm.
nostalgic as fuck. I was, and so I just listening to it. I was like, I'm just hanging out with my friends. It was so
I
cool.
love that. I'm so glad because, like, I don't know. I felt like when we were younger, you kept wanting to have like these deep, big conversations, and like my brain couldn't handle. Like, I just wasn't articulate enough. I never understood what you were talking about, and so it made me really happy when you reached out because I'm like, oh hell yeah, I think I can actually have a good conversation with him now.
You know what's nuts is I really feel like, for one thing, I was way too arrogant and I really had no clue what I was saying. And the second thing is that like I feel like correct me if I'm wrong, but I felt like we kind of had some competition going between the two of us. Like we definitely drove each other to be better, I think.
Oh, I can definitely see that, 100%.
Yeah.
And like where you say you had arrogance, like I could kind of see that, but I feel like even when I've started to develop this ability to like talk to people about big concepts, I've been super arrogant or like just or ignorant as
Hmm.
well. And it's like it just takes me talking to people and being told that I'm being dumb in order for me to learn and get better at it. And so like don't beat yourself up for thinking that you were arrogant because like it's probably good for you.
Right. Well, and I think that you can fall victim to the spotlight effect where
Mm,
you you're so preoccupied in what you're saying and what words you're using, and I think at least for me, I kind of fall in love with the sound of my own voice, and I gotta
mm.
just be like, okay, is this landing? Is any of this actually making sense? Because if not, I'm really embarrassed. you know.
I feel like I relate to that so much. Like lately, I'll just start like ranting at people because I'm like, man, I sound so smart, and then they'll just be like, Nathan, you're like none of this is reaching me. Like you're just kind of annoying me now. And I'm like, oh, okay, sorry.
Awesome. Oh man.
You know
Oh,
what's
so.
funny though?
Mhm.
Um, so like the other day, I was thinking about there was this time where you and I were hanging out. And I remember I don't know how, but we got on the conversation of like God. And this
Mhm.
was when like, I don't know, maybe like 13 or 14. And at one
Mhm.
point you were like, well, I think I am God. And I was like, oh my, what? And I got terrified. I was like, oh no, he's like a megalomaniac. He's just like, he's everything. And then like now I feel like I'm starting to realize what you were actually talking about. I don't know if what you were getting at that age was like, oh no, we are all God and I am also God and a reflection of God. Do you feel like that's what you were saying at that age?
You know, I was definitely approaching something that I didn't understand, uh,
Hmm.
because no one can understand completely a omniscient, omnipresent being that's responsible for the creation of the universe, right? I mean,
100%.
that's still true today. I think about that a lot. How if such an entity were to exist,
Hmm.
it's an exercise in futility that we'd even be able, even an attempt to conceptualize the enormity of such a being would be futile.
Hmm.
And so I think I'm, I'm kind of in the same position that I was, but the statement of "I think I am God,"
Yeah.
is actually, uh, I think, accurate in that if a being did exist like that, then everything that is the product of such a being would carry like a piece of it. All of us would be an
100%.
extension, yeah, of that being.
Yeah. And I actually really agree with that, which is why I'm actually looking back on that situation very fondly now because I'm like, oh, I feel like he was trying to tell me something. And I was just like more scared or afraid of what I thought he was talking about. Because at the time, I could only conceptualize God as this big man in the sky who would, strike me down as he caught me masturbating. So
Right.
like at the time I was like, whoa, Casey thinks he's that guy. What is happening? But I feel like exactly what you said is more accurate, and I'm actually seeing that now. Just the idea that like the real notion of God has to be something that encapsulates or has created everything. And if I'm a product of that, or I am a part of that, then I am a part of God in some way. Especially where I think that like any of the boundaries that we've created in this existence to create a self, I think of those as just illusions or, you know, temporary tools for our situation. I think of those in that way. So I really see everything all at once as God. And so therefore, since I'm a part of that, since I'm here, I am God. I'm just not that pouty child in the sky that's wanting the universe to bend to my will.
Right. Like the jealous God, the God that, you know,
Mm-hmm.
punishes his people for 40 years for making a golden cow one time or two. I don't know. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, guys, I really hate that cow. It's got to go.
Exactly. It's just that concept never made sense to me. So I just wanted to bring that up during this podcast because I really felt like I'm starting to catch on to the things that you had always tried to talk to me about when we were younger.
Well, you know, I'm glad I made an impression, you know, all those years.
Oh, yeah.
Because you definitely made an impression. 100%.
I'm so glad. And probably not in the way I was wanting to, but yes.
To speak on that further, I really think that that there is an awakening, a religious awakening happening right now. I'm sure you've seen more than one article about the rise of the nuns, the demographic of people that are self-identifying as non-affiliated with any religion, like non-practicing of any religion. They make up more than half of all Americans at this point. You know, not just and I think that it's not that they're losing touch with faith or their belief system, but I think they're seeing that there's no benefit to an organized religion or participating in an organized religion.
And definitely. And I feel like the people that are participating in the organized religion are kind of slowly, they're just half in, half out from what I've seen. It's like, oh, this gives me a sense of community, but a lot of the tenets that are like really dominating in my life, I'm just not going to really pay attention to, or I'll just ignore kind of thing. So I definitely am seeing that.
Yeah. Like I'm a religious, I practice my religion as I'm obligated to, but that's not my identity. I don't identify as a religious person. Right, I'm simply obligated to participate, is I think the attitude a lot of people have. And what I think is so important about that is that individualism was not really adopted by religion. You know, like as part of your religion, you become part of a community and you assimilate and you kind of lose your individualism. Like, of course, the being that you worship knows you personally and loves you personally, but you have to follow the rules that everyone else follows, and you have to do what everyone else does, and basically, you know, depending on the religion, repeat verbatim what everyone else is saying in order to you know, achieve the transcendence of said religion, right? And so and like, you know, I really want to be clear, I don't have anything against religious people or religion in general. I just think that it's out of touch. It's like a vestigial system that needs to adapt to modern society and who we are.
100%.
Yeah
it's kind of interesting that you say that, though. Oh, sorry. So like when you say that that religion isn't very individualistic in nature, it's really interesting because we, like, our culture and our society are very individualistic, and people are still having to be a part of both and try to incorporate them together. And I think it's just causing a lot of cognitive dissonance for them. And so I kind of see what you're getting at, where we're starting to see people reject organized religion because of that, probably.
Absolutely. One example of that is, uh, and once again, I really don't mean to detract or talk about any religion in a negative light. You know, everyone deserves to dictate their own religion and belief system.
Hmm.
But watching the struggles of that LDS bishop who was trying to achieve reform within the LDS community about um, I'm sure you've heard of him. You know, the one-on-one
Yeah, like
interviews.
interviews with children. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You know that, you know, a fairly innocuous attempt at reform. You know, he wasn't. He
Hmm.
was very clear. He was not against anything. He wasn't speaking out against anything. He was like, let's just improve on this, right? Let's just make it safer.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
he was met with a lot of resistance, and I think he ended up getting excommunicated,
He got
right?
educated. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so
That was so interesting.
hmm it's just that they're so resistant to change and reform of any kind. Uh,
Hmm.
I think
Unless it's
will
top down.
right, right. Well, and it'll ultimately be the downfall of organized religion as we know it. I mean, I don't think it'll ever end, but it'll definitely transform itself.
Yeah. And it's like, I think the way it has to transform is it has to understand that it really can't be this like this built ideology that everyone has to operate within, because there's just so many. Everybody is having individual lives and individual experiences that are so different. And if this dogma is trying to put you in a box and say this is how you should be experiencing the world, it's just not going to last, right? And
Hmm
so I think where it, like, I don't want to disparage any religions either, but it's like the spiritual experience is individual in nature. Like you have to come to terms with your own spirituality, your own essence of being. And so if it's kind of being force fed to you in a way that you can't question, it's just not going to be sustainable in
hmm
people's lives.
Right, right. It's incredibly reductive to
Hmm.
say follow these rules, put together this little life with all of these
Hmm.
pieces, right? Right. Like I literally imagine a manufacturing line where like
Yeah.
they tell you like, hey, just stick this thing into this socket your whole life, and you're gonna
Hmm.
make it, man. Like that's it.
Yeah.
And
And
it just doesn't foster well-being, I don't think.
or growth.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
sort of feels stagnant. Like, I've listened to Terrence McKenna talk about like ideology, and one of the things he says, he's like, I don't know why, if you're going to subscribe to an ideology, I don't even know why they issued you a brain, because it's telling you this is everything that it is. You already know everything. There's no point in trying to learn more unless it's within this specific framework. And even then, that framework has to say, we know everything. And
Mhm.
then when new discoveries come out, it has to be like, yeah, we knew that all along. Or like, it just doesn't compute. And I can definitely see where that just doesn't cultivate well-being, because it's
Mhm.
not cultivating growth.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. I agree 100%. And that's honestly, I know you love Russell Brand, so I'm just going to plug Russell Brand here.
Oh,
Because
please do.
when he, in his book Revolution, he actually kind of prompted me to rediscover religion because he talks
Hmm.
about have you read that book yet?
Yeah, I did, because you said like,
Awesome.
hey, he's got some good ideas for revolution, and dude, I loved it so much.
That's amazing. Well, he talks about religion in such a loving way and such
Hmm.
a conscious way where he talks about the symbolism of the cross, and
Hmm.
he talks about how uh specifically Christ, because I think that's more in his wheelhouse, is
Hmm.
it's like a multi-dimensional be like it's layered, like you have a
Hmm.
person that existed at this time in this place, but then you also have the representation and the symbolism that he's grown to capture. And anyway, with Russell Brand, dude, I love how nothing is simple with him. He's always got something
Hmm.
to say.
Yes, and he allows for nuance, which is like really important,
Right.
especially when it comes to religion. Because like one of the things that like really reawakened a spiritual sense within me from listening to Russell Brand is just his like the concept of like we need to start taking what's good from all these religions instead of like only paying attention to what's bad and then like rejecting them for that.
Hmm.
And just that like shift in thought for me has allowed me to like build better relationships with my religious friends
Hmm.
because I'm able to say like I understand where you're coming from. I just don't, maybe agree with the way that you are interpreting or painting the world or the universe.
Hmm.
But being able to see like, oh, I know that you're sourcing your spirituality from the same place that I am and just using it in a different way. That's like it allows me to connect with them and build meaningful relationships there.
Yeah, and you know what that is that's just the same mindset that you wish that they would have, right? Like all you want
Yeah,
to be is
exactly.
accepted, right? So if you accept them, you're like that's just Gandhi's teaching right there. Like be the change,
Right.
you know?
It's why is it so simple but yet so hard for so many people?
Right? Yeah, I know, man. But like I do think that there's value in Christianity. I think there's value in
Mm,
every religion. I've been reading a lot of. I read a lot. I read a book and a half on Buddhism, so I'm no expert.
mm,
But one of the things that struck me was that they were like, you don't have. It's basically like a pick your plan type of deal, where like you can
yeah.
incorporate some values from Buddhism into your life, or you can become a monk. Like it's totally
Mhm.
up to you, which was so refreshing to hear
Oh,
from a
for
religion.
real.
you know
Right?
just
Yeah, I've
like
kind of heard that with Buddhism. It's sort of like a choose your own adventure. It's like if these principles are not benefiting you or creating well-being in your life, reject them. Like you don't have to cling on to these and then believe that everything else is falls because of it. It's sort of just guidelines, right?
hmm yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a religion, and with any religion, stuff that's written down is misinterpreted or
Hmm.
taken to the extreme, and you end up with some eccentric people. but uh,
Yeah.
but I think that as a philosophy, it is incredible, and it's going to
Hmm.
change the way if you read into it, it'll definitely change the way that you think because it totally removes the concept of um, I think it's not the antithesis of the hero's journey because like you
Hmm.
do have Buddha and you do have him discovering this whole and starting this whole religion, right? So he's kind of
Hmm.
the catalyst for this change, right? So you kind of can't help
Yeah.
but to worship, feel like worshiping Buddha. Be like, wow, that's the guy that figured it out.
Hmm.
He's the
Yeah.
Einstein of Buddhism, but
Hmm.
but he even said that like Buddha is it shouldn't be focused on me. Like I'm not Buddha. Buddha is more than me. And Buddhism talks about a lot of that. Like all of us are connected to Buddha. We can all become Buddha. It's very anti-central. It's decentralized.
Yeah. I've actually heard that a lot about it. It's like I can see how it'd be easy to try to worship Buddha when he is this template for enlightenment. So, but I feel like Buddhism is like aware that he really can't be a perfect template because everybody's lives are going to be unique and different, and so
Hmm.
we can't like worship him and be like, oh, we have to copy his behaviors and his beliefs like to a T. We have
Right.
to actually we have to take these teachings, incorporate them in our lives, and evaluate them from there.
hmm And they'll even go so far as to, and once I'm no expert, and if I'm misrepresenting Buddhism, I truly apologize. But
Yeah.
some things that I've seen is, or that I've read, is that they'll give you a paradoxical concept. A really really popular one is like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? You know.
Mm.
And my friend, when I asked him that, he was just like, "Oh, it's this," and then he like flapped his fingers really fast into his palm, like he had mastered one-handed clapping. I was
He's
like,
like,
"Oh
see, I
man,
can do it.
yeah, exactly." But I
Just
think
ruin my object lesson. Well, okay.
seriously, I was like, "All right, cool." He uh, what it means to do though, I think what they're attempting to do is they're trying to say that like there doesn't necessarily need an objective, right? And these
Mm.
paradoxes, these like problems of the mind that have no solution, are supposed to show you that there is no solution. It's all here. This is the solution.
Mm. Ooh, I love that.
Contemplation is the solution.
That Yeah, that's beautiful. Like that's something that just became really important for me when I started meditating, and a lot of the teachings from meditation include just that, like accepting yourself as you are right now, because the present moment is all there is, right?
Hmm.
This is the ultimate reality, the present moment. And by constantly chasing a goal, you're never actually accepting the moment that you're in. So therefore, when you actually reach that end goal, you almost can't even fully appreciate it, because you've never learned how to appreciate every moment that led up to it.
Right.
Um, and so I like that a lot.
Hmm. Yeah, one thing that, like, you talk about goal acquisition, and essentially
Hmm.
what that is it's an imposition of will. You've
Yeah.
chosen it, you've chosen something to achieve, and then you've achieved it. And
Hmm.
um, that kind of rabbit hole of thought for me um, has kind of led me to think that there are basically the mechanism for whatever your goal is. So like I don't know, it's like I watched a YouTube video. Let me start from the beginning.
Hmm.
I watched a YouTube video called "Rules for the Rulers." It's amazing.
Hmm.
If you have you ever heard of it?
No.
Okay, it's basically a historical perspective on how rulers come into power and how they maintain power. And
Mm.
the idea is that a ruler must allocate resources and basically create relationships with pillars of the state, which is generally like banks, security, or military,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
like administration, right, standing government or whatever.
Hmm.
And they have to create these relationships with those people, but uh, achieving power and maintaining power require different um, relationships and different,
Abilities and skill sets.
yeah, mechanisms of control, right? And so
Mm.
uh what the problem is that they build these mechanisms to achieve power, but those same mechanisms are not useful when they're actually in power, like the maintaining power. And so they end up, and that's why what that really showed me is that power isn't a object. It's not something that can be
Mm.
hoarded or it's actually like like electricity is how I see it. And
Yeah,
you're
it's
just
like
a,
maintained and routed
yeah,
almost.
yeah, exactly. And like you're just a vessel, you know. And that's
Yeah.
why I think, like, we look at Napoleon or we look at other leaders, and we think that, like, wow, what did that guy have that made him so special? Well, he
Mm.
just he saw a vacuum, like, yeah, there was an opportunity there, and he seized that opportunity. But as soon as he became a conduit of power, literally, that's kind of a pun, but like.
Yeah, conduit of power.
But once he became that, he actually is a it's like a non-voluntary position at that point. Like there's nothing he can do. The
Mm.
power is just traveling through him at that point.
Interesting, because of the structures that he created through that. And then, but so then how would he be maintaining that power? Would he still have to be creating structures to maintain that? Or you're saying that once he sort of put himself in that position, he's um, now a byproduct of it?
He is he is trapped in that position. So
Mm.
how do you maintain power? By whatever means necessary. That's the only correct answer to that
Uh-huh.
question, right?
Uh-huh.
Just think about it. Like once you have it,
Interesting.
once you have control, you can't relinquish it. And that's why one of my favorite teachings from Christ, is that
Uh-huh.
it's harder for a rich person to get into heaven than it is for a camel to fit through the eye of a needle. Like you've heard that before, right?
Wow. I have not actually.
Oh, it's awesome. It's a good one because this
I
guy,
love that.
this rich dude, he came to Jesus. He's like, "Hey, I want to get into heaven. What should I do?" And he's like, "Well, it's not going to be easy." That's basically what he
Yeah.
says. And what I what I learned from that, just my interpretation, is that once you have control, once you've developed that kind of controlling relationship with your environment, or like a social control, because that's one of the most powerful types, uh, relinquishing it, realizing that you're not special, that it's not you, that your power, your control is not who you are. Relinquishing that is the hardest decision ever.
Yeah, that's insane. Actually, that makes me think of one of Russell Brand's guests on the podcast. And I'm totally spacing on his name right now, but he was talking about, because he was in this high level government position in Greece. And one of the things that he saw while he was operating within that system is he was like, they don't actually hold any power. All of the power that they have is confined within their position, within their role. And that defines all of the power that they have, because they could be replaced at any minute, and that position will be filled, and that will just maintain the structure of power that's already there. And that's kind of interesting to me, especially that the whole concept of how do you maintain power by any means necessary. It's just trying to maintain that position that you are a vessel for.
Right. You become, seriously, I truly believe, and Russell Brand taught me this, that rich, well, the super rich are victims of their own aspirations, their own, or own their own wealth. Because I didn't drive a car until, or I didn't buy a car until I was 22, 23. During college, I took public transit. I love public transit. Everyone should do it. Once I had a car, though, like the idea of not having a car becomes so difficult.
Oh yeah, because you create your life, you curate your life around it.
Right. It's like all of a sudden, everything having to do with transportation becomes much easier and much less stressful, because it doesn't require as much forethought. And for me, I always kind of remind myself of that like, hey Casey, like you're so ideological, you think that power corrupts, right? It so easily corrupts. But like, look at you in your car. As soon as you bought a car, there was no looking back. You're not taking the bus anymore. You're not walking anywhere.
That's like, that's so interesting.
Right. Well, and like you would just take it for granted. And I don't want to be like one of those woke people that's like, oh hey, like ditch all your stuff, go be a nomad, go be part of the land. But it's an illustration of how easily control corrupts and like just solidifies your position in your world and your relationship with the world.
Yeah, and I think the problem is that like once we are put in that like position of power of having a car, you're forced, like we said, you're forced to try to maintain that, and that even though at any point you could just like your car could get totaled and then you don't have a car anymore, right? So I understand not wanting to be woke and be like, oh, everybody needs to ditch their car, because like we all are like clinging to these comforts. But if we were able to prioritize like something that's actually truly more meaningful to us, like connection, love, and our interpersonal relationships and stuff, and we'd be more afraid of losing those than the car that like makes life a little convenient and easier for us. Like I see it's not necessarily going to have to be like, oh, we're going to have to rip your car from you tooth and nail. It's more like, no, I found something that's more valuable. I found something that's more valuable than all this power and wealth that I've attained, because in the end, all I was ever doing was trying to maintain it and grow it, rather than using it for things that I actually find valuable, like my love and my connections within my life. So I think that's a really cool example of where, yes, it's convenient, and yes, it allows you to do so many other things. But if we're wanting to actually prioritize better things in our life and cultivate a society and a culture that is way more fulfilling for us, then we have to not be afraid of losing these comforts and losing this power that we have. Because I think about that too. Like I've been talking with my friends and stuff about how we could possibly change the world. And one of the things I'm like talking about is like, well, we need to democratize agriculture. We need to be growing our own food and not be like reliant on, imported food. And one of the things I talk about is like, wow, you really want to give up like a hamburger? You want to give up like all this delicious food? And I like when I sit there and think, I'm like, oh, well, no, I don't. But I'm like, but what I'm prioritizing over that is the ability to be free and developing relationships with other people and cultivating an ecologically sustainable world instead of prioritizing these comforts and seeking to maintain them by whatever means possible.
Right, right. Yeah, it requires a cultural shift, I think is what you're
Mm.
describing. Because
Yeah.
like you say, and like Russell Brand says, like we have the power. We have all of the power all
Hmm.
of the time. Like we voluntarily participate in this clusterfuck of a
Yeah.
world. And
Exactly.
but like if we so it's not even a we don't even have to change reality. We just have to change how we view it. and and the answers are simple, and it's like when your parents said like eat your vegetables. Like you
Hmm.
forgot that, but it turns out after like hundreds of scientific studies that, yeah, guess what, you want to eat your vegetables. you know so here we are, wondering to ourselves like, man, where are all these problems coming from? And it's like, because we've been seduced by the short term and the convenient. And I think the auto industry is actually a
Hmm.
perfect example of that, because look at Japan, look at Europe. They invested in their public transit systems, and they're you know benefiting as a community from that. Like I think that the public
Hmm.
transit is an enormously democratizing part of any society. It brings us
Hmm.
all, it lifts us all up. And in America, we had a uh, all of our public transit was purposefully um, destroyed because
Yeah.
of
Inhibited.
the car industry, the automobile industry,
Hmm.
General Motors. And we're reaping the benefits of that, aren't we?
Yeah,
Capitalism.
we are. Man, and it's like I'm also wondering, is the reason that we are overlooking these simple solutions because we're really not willing to look at those aspects of ourself? Like, I don't know, like if we say like, oh yeah, we can all agree and understand that cars are bad for the environment, but I'm not willing to relinquish my ownership of a car because I don't see myself as the problem. I really see like the auto industry as a problem, or like just the way that people are able to push it off of
Mhm.
themselves and say like, well, I know everybody should eat their vegetables, but nobody else is either, and so that's
Mhm.
the problem. Do you think that's what's causing us to overlook these simple solutions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
It's I talked to my friend about this in college, and oh, forgive me, I forgot his name, but he was this amazing guy, and I didn't appreciate him. We had an architecture class together, and he was super into open source operating systems. Like he would not use
Mhm.
Windows, he would not use Apple operating systems at all. Like this guy was like hardcore
So awesome.
ideological, and he was a vegan too. He roasted his own coffee beans. Like I wanted to like worship this guy.
How
He
are
was.
people so cool?
I know, dude. Exactly. And I asked him. He was vegan, and I was like, "Hey, man, like you and I both know people. We both know that the majority of people aren't going to go vegan, and not enough people are going to make this change. So why? What's the point of me doing it?" And he was like, "Well, I see a choice in that statement. One is that you live in an environment that does that, or you align yourself with an environment that doesn't, like a society that doesn't.
Mm,
Like you have to believe that tomorrow's going to be different and better, or it won't."
mm.
And
I love that so much.
yeah, dude, and he actually convinced me to be pescatarian. Like I've
That's
been
awesome.
I've been pescatarian this whole time, which of course is barely anything. And like you shouldn't applaud me for that. Like
Mm.
it's not. It's like honestly, it was a long time coming because I ate like shit before that.
Yeah.
That's all just self-preservation. But like anyway, it struck me, dude. And so I think that, like, yes, a drop in an ocean is just that, but the ocean is just drops of water, right? So it's got to
Mhm.
start somewhere.
I
Gotta
really
start
like
somewhere.
that, especially in regards to veganism, because like I sort of kept telling myself that too. I'm like, yeah, when I look at my beliefs about like factory farming, when I look at my beliefs about what what it would actually look like if the entire world was eating as much meat as I do on a daily basis, and understanding like the ecological impacts of that. When I look at that, I'm like, oh, that like I agree that I should be vegan. I want to be vegan. But then I'm like, but then I always counter it with, oh, but no one, I'm not going to convince anyone to be vegan. So I don't see the point in it. And then I guess this conversation really shows me like, why does that have to be the deciding factor? Because it really should be, or I really want it to be, that it's meaningful to me. I'm aligning myself with my values, and then I can actually start to see a reality that's built around those values, mostly because I'm participating in a community that's also embodying those values. But then we can actually start to see that change that we actually are telling ourselves is not going to be there anyways, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So I like that.
yeah. It definitely it always just starts with one person, and that sounds like such a
Well, it's true.
cop out, but
100%.
yeah, yeah, but
Like it really does.
and I don't know. I think that we are a lot more nature than we think that we are. Like
Oh yeah.
we treat issues like pollution and like all of the ecological issues like as if they're new, but like I was reading about how at one point in early Earth, like ancient history, not even history, but like there was a back before the dinosaurs, the entire
Mm,
planet was covered in trees, and it was like trees growing on top of trees, and like most of that is why we have coal is from that era, because of
really?
yeah, so trees like literally trees would die, and then trees would grow out of those trees, and they just keep dying and stuff, and then there was no bacteria or no microorganism that could break down. I believe it was cellulose, although I could be wrong. Either
Hmm.
way, the point is that a bacteria evolved that could. So basically, all of this biomatter that trees had produced became edible for this bacteria. The bacteria ran rampant, killed all of the trees, or enough of the trees on the entire planet. And the product of that is all of the iron deposits in the soil and the oxygen-rich atmosphere. Was all of that bacteria?
Holy cow.
But they literally killed themselves doing it. Those bacteria, like, they're not around, or maybe their descendants are. But the point of that is that like you have this single living organism that basically terraformed the planet, and like they're calling this scene the I think it's a plastic scene, the plasticine,
Uh-huh.
because we're creating this chemical compound plastic that's never existed before on Earth, and we'll be able to. This plastic is being distributed everywhere, like at the bottom of the ocean and the trees and us, everything, and so
Yeah.
so that's how we'll be identified, billions of years into the future by like this
Oh.
weird chemical thing that we just created, spontaneously.
Oh, it's like I kind of hate that just because I'm seeing like all the problems that that's causing now for our
Mhm.
environment and for like all the other species trying to live here. Um, but it's interesting to frame it in that way because maybe at the time that this bacteria was forming, all the trees were like, "Fuck, we're gonna die," like this bacteria is evil. But in reality, it was just paving the way for something completely new.
Right.
That's so interesting. Holy cow.
And I probably used all the wrong words there, but go look it up, you listeners, all three of you.
Yes. Oh,
probably
Mom.
probably me later. I'll go look it up. Be like, Casey, you're
Yes.
dumb. Oh,
I That's super interesting though, because like, yeah, I feel like when talking about like climate change and everything like that, I feel like it, especially on the left, it sort of has to be phrased as like we are the only species that has ever like changed the planet in this way. And so that just right there already like shows me something new, and I can actually look at sort of the solutions that we have to come up with,
Mhm.
and understand them from a new point of view, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just healthy to maintain perspective, right? Like we're all just
Yeah.
natural, we're just creatures, like we're like
Hmm.
termites. We process the environments that we're in, and like one thing that blew my mind. I don't mean to just make this a mind-blowing podcast, but
No,
the con
it's fine. This is what I want.
but the concept of cooking food, you know,
Hmm.
basically creating a chemical reaction outside of your body to then consume the product of that reaction. You're basically,
Hmm.
it reminds me of flies, how they like vomit onto surfaces and then like suck up the vomit, because like they basically digest their food
Interesting.
outside of their bodies. So that's
I
what
did
we're
not
doing.
know that.
Oh, really? Yeah. So that's what we're doing when we cook food. We're basically just digesting it partially outside of the body and then eating it and digesting it.
That's so wild. That's an interesting way to think of it, because like a lot of evolutionary biologists will look at the way that when we started cooking food, that's kind of what they believe is what jump started like the doubling in size of the human brain, and just like all of the
Really?
genetic changes that came from that. Yeah. Terrence McKenna likes to say that it was from uh, eating mushrooms.
Hmm.
Um, and that was like increasing consciousness. It was
Hmm.
increasing libido, and it was increasing like visual acuity and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But other scientists are like, yeah, it could have been a factor, but one of the biggest things that we're looking at right now is when humans started to cook their food. It may have been, maybe those two things together may have been like the thing that
Hmm.
created this human level of consciousness that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I mean, the domestication
Hmm.
of plants,
Oh
100%.
yeah.
But yeah,
Hmm.
I think a precursor to that would be how to, because plants have like natural defense mechanisms. Like there's a reason you can't just eat a
Hmm.
raw potato or eat a raw bean. It's because it'll make
Yeah.
you sick, and your stomach can't
Hmm.
digest that. So yeah, I think that, and that's why I love looking back at like early Earth stuff and like history, because
Hmm.
to me it's less about the importance of the events and more about the process, the patterns that you see. And I mean, that's not a
Mm.
new thing to say, but I think there are trends that exist that kind of are they're taken for granted, right? Like
Yeah,
cooking
100%.
food. You don't think about that shit. You just do it.
Mm-mm. Yeah, and honestly, we are products of those trends, and those trends will continue whether we know it or not, right?
Hmm.
We're kind of um, constantly creating these new trends, and if we're able to look back and see these patterns, it just gives us this new perspective that is really important, especially in determining on how we want to move forward.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that's super valuable, and I like that.
I did have a question for you.
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter. What do you think about that?
Hmm. I mean, I, I'm amazed that it's like a controversial statement
Mm.
that Black Lives Matter. I understand like the maybe the emotional and social political weight that comes behind that phrase, but it's kind of hard to say because like I agree with the movement. I do believe that the police state is is just sort of practiced to see Black people as a threat, and that has negatively influenced the Black community immensely. And like, it's sad that I wasn't able to really fully understand this until I saw a video of a man with a cop's knee on his neck, on the back of,
Mm.
on his back for 9 minutes.
Hmm.
And then there was just this flood of understanding from everybody finally speaking out. And,
Hmm.
I kept hearing like, oh, this isn't new. We just now have cameras to view it, And then
Hmm.
I've been really into, or I started getting into like rap and specifically Childish Gambino. and
Awesome.
he
Nice.
came out with This Is America, yeah, around that
Yes.
time. And so like I just kind of got more immersed in seeing that new perspective, and um, I want, in a lot of ways I want to know what I can do, because it's kind of hard, as a white guy. It's like I
Hmm.
don't want to inject myself into that space and
Right.
say like, oh, I need to be the hero now. It's like I
Hmm.
just want to do my part.
Yeah, yeah. And like I've been consuming a lot of media that supports and kind of reinforces the motivation behind Black Lives Matter. Specifically, I read, the new
Hmm.
Jim Crow, very
Oh yeah.
popular book, and I also read. It was on Oprah's list of books to read. The Cast, The Origins of Our Discontent,
Mm.
which discusses basically the issue of race in modern day life. How
Hmm.
it's the issues that it's causing. And I'm mentioning both of those books because Cast and the Origins of Our Discontent was kind of did not really mention mass incarceration, which I
Oh
was
dang.
surprised because I had just finished reading the new Jim Crow, which came out in 2010, and
Hmm.
then I read this new book that came out in 2020, and it didn't really seem to mention it at all. And I mean, the new Jim Crow actually addresses that, which is funny.
Yeah.
It addresses how a lot of contemporary media will address racial issues, but it won't address mass incarceration. It's like and I think the reason is that it's easy to dehumanize a criminal.
Oh
It's
yeah.
so easy. I mean, look at the trial going on right now. Why is
Hmm.
there a trial? I mean, obviously, I know why there's a trial, but like the fact that it's getting so much
Due process.
attention is because
Hmm.
we want to because it's
We want to
driving.
see justice for what happened.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and I think so many people are looking for an excuse to stick to the status quo, to stick to the trend, to be like, oh, that there it is. That's why this man died. It's not because of this
Hmm.
social issue or this race issue. It's because uh, of whatever this triviality.
Because there were drugs in his system or something,
Yeah, yeah.
something that's just like that doesn't seem to actually address the problem that was happening in the first place. Like, why were cops being called about a counterfeit bill,
Mhm,
when I just don't think that would even really happen. Uh, I don't even think it would be questioned if if the white person was in this
mhm.
situation, I guess.
Right.
But I think it's kind of interesting that that book doesn't talk about mass incarceration, and that you point out that we don't really look at mass incarceration as a big part of the problem when it comes to race relations. Because, like, I didn't even think of it as a problem for a long time either, because it was so easy to just say, like, oh, if someone's in prison, it's because they are a criminal, they are bad.
Mhm,
And something that maybe is a little off topic, but is sort of what, when it changed in my mind, kind of made help me understand the problem of incarceration and what it's doing to people. But just the idea that, like, if someone was convicted of murder, we call them a murderer. So in
mm.
our mind, they are consistently murdering all the time. They,
Right.
at any moment, this person could murder you because they are a murderer. um, and so I'm like, what if we were able to actually say, like, that person has committed murder, and there's a lot of nuances behind that situation, there's a lot of complexities in that individual's life, but in the end, what we want to do is end the violence that that
Mhm.
person caused. So we can't combat it with more violence, especially
Right.
through this incarceration system that completely dehumanizes people and just perpetuates criminal activity, and just like it keeps them down and depressed and just incapable of growth.
Mhm.
And it's so sad that, learning about mass incarceration for the Black community, it was so sad to see how not only were we just throwing in innocent people into this system and almost like creating and manufacturing criminals as we understand them, but that we kind of all sat and perpetuated it by thinking, oh, these are criminals, they deserve to be there.
Right. Yeah, that's it. It's the implied um, consent. It's because a lot of in the new Jim Crow it talks about how police officers will ask you if they can search you, right? And
Hmm.
so as a person sitting on a couch, I could be like, oh, well, I would just say no. You know, you have drugs on you. Why wouldn't you say no? And it's like, well,
Yeah.
because, you know, it's because this is literally a front line of a war. And when police
Yeah.
officers pull up onto the curb, it talks about this in the book in 2010. So I don't know if this is current, you know, but
Mhm.
a police officer will pull up onto the curb, and these young men will just immediately spread their legs, put their hands on the wall, and just wait to be searched. You know, it's
Oh
it's a
my God.
it's like ingrained into the
Ceremony.
culture there. Yeah, exactly. And so really, really good book. Like, could not recommend more highly. Uh, and then the
Yeah, I'll
other
have to check
part
it
of
out.
the other part of that too was the the aftermath. You know, because once you're a felon
Mm.
in so many states, most states, you can't vote. You have restricted access to any sort of welfare program.
Mhm.
Your family, you know, not to mention the shame that is uh, just you carry forever because like you have
Yeah.
something on your permanent record. You know, not to mention getting a job, securing transportation. Right? How are you supposed to get to a
Yeah.
job to wherever you're supposed to work when you can't even qualify for a loan for a car? It's just
Oh, that kills me. It's so stupid because the whole reason we're putting them in prison is because we're like, hey, you've caused a deficit on society and you now need to pay that back. So once they've paid that back by serving their sentence, you think it should be like, okay, you've done it. The system worked. But instead, it's like, no, you're branded now, and we will not let you progress in society because we're still punishing you for this
hmm
thing that you did.
yeah,
And that,
yeah.
oh, that kills me.
Yeah, and you know, I also feel uncomfortable talking about it. I'm glad that you mentioned that because I'm not a
Hmm.
victim of this.
Hmm.
I can barely understand it. Tell you the truth,
Hmm.
I can't
Yeah.
understand it. I'm not, you know, but we do have to be part of the solution
Yeah.
because it's not their responsibility to fix the issues that we created.
No,
Yeah, you know, we have to do it. We have
I
to.
agree. And it's like, and so that's the shift that I'm trying to have. Because I think a lot of people who are resistant to the Black Lives Matter movement, I think they assume that the way that things are going to be fixed, it's like, all right, now we have to do the same thing that white people have been doing to black people for years. We have to flip that and make sure that black people can do that to white people now.
Hmm
And it's like, that can't be the solution because it's just going to cause the same problems. So I, maybe that's not why they're really afraid of it, but I think like everybody knows that that cannot be the solution. And
Mm.
so, and I don't think anyone's really calling for that solution, right?
No.
The Black Lives Matter movement is really just wanting to end this inequality, and I think it's up to us as white people to listen and
hmm
actually help make sure that change happens. And so that's kind of where I'm at, where I want to do what I want to do. So
hmm
that's kind of my thoughts on it, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, you know, I think. Oh man, I lost my train of thought. Dang it.
No stress.
Oh no, but those books though, definitely check out those
Hmm.
books. Oh, I remember now. Okay, in Cast: The
Hmm.
Origins of Our Discontent, which is extremely relevant.
Hmm.
You should read it. It talks
Hmm.
about the anxiousness of well, it basically explains because this has been proven by academics that America has a caste system, and the caste system
Hmm.
is intimately tied to race. In that
Oh yeah.
you have the dominant caste, which is white, and then you have the lower caste, which is uh, then you have the middle caste, which is other minority groups like Hispanics, Asians, um,
Hmm.
and then you have the lower caste, which is blacks. And
Hmm.
uh, it talks about when Obama being elected, you know, that he was not, he wasn't, he was black, but he, due to his like heritage, he was a little bit, he could be viewed differently, which is why a lot of them saw the appeal. And I'm horribly
Hmm.
paraphrasing, you know, but when he was
Well, it's,
elected,
do you kind of mean that he was like this perfect epitome of like the system as it is right now, but with a black face so that it could sort of appear like there's a bigger change happening?
no, no, he. he
Mm.
wasn't. His family was not from. Um, I'm really butchering this, but basically his parentage was not conventional. It wasn't that he was.
Mhm.
Um, it was basically a technicality that allowed some people who are concerned with such things to view him differently than the black people that occupy like the projects or
Mhm.
that represent a lot of the social issues that have been manufactured to create kind of a divide
This
between
cast.
poor whites and poor
Mhm.
blacks, right? So he didn't
Mhm.
represent that, and honestly, like that family was perfect, like squeaky
Mm.
clean. Like he was like the best candidate for presidency, which is why he won. If there had been any scandal or
Mhm.
anything like that, he would have been.
Yeah,
There's no way.
yeah, it would have been
But
scandalized a lot more than anyone else.
right, and that's not really my point. The point that I was trying to make is that the backlash of his presidency was that you saw a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear coming from the lowest portion of the dominant caste, like poor whites, because
Mm.
they saw a minority as president and that threatened them because what's supposed to make them special is that they have a class below them, right? That's where they draw
Mm.
their superiority from. And the book calls that a racial bribe, is basically what it is, where it's
Ooh.
like, hey, we're going to pay you off. And this happened in history as well. Originally, uh, blacks and whites weren't enslaved, they worked together as free men in the American colonies. And then at some
Ooh.
point, they started realizing, hey, maybe we should democratize this and like make something better. And so what happened was they said, okay, well, we're going to um, treat the whites as superior to the blacks, which eventually, kind of led to slavery and being adopted by all of the colonies. We're gonna and we're gonna do that to kind of divide the working class. Like that was intentional from the beginning.
Interesting.
And
Mhm.
so you see the backlash and the reason that Trump got so much support, according to this book, "Caste and the Origins of Our Discontent," is that of
Mhm.
that anxiety, they are threatened in their position, and so they're going to be radicalized in opposition to that. So what we're seeing is kind of a fallout from um, that kind of per, you know perspective, which is
Mhm.
interesting. I think it's just
Yeah.
I'm not sponsored by this book in any way, by the way.
It's like it's interesting though because it's not very like it's not very explicit. Like if you tried to tell anyone who supported Trump in 2016 that the only reason you're doing that is, or not the only reason, but one of the reasons that you're doing that is because you're really experiencing some anxiety from seeing Obama as president, and that is indicative of you losing your position in society to people that you either fear or hate.
Mhm.
Because it's like most Trump supporters would never admit that they're racist, right?
Right.
Or I mean, any of those Trump supporters that are racist just wouldn't admit it. So I guess what I'm curious about is how are we really supposed to acknowledge that? Because I don't know if there's any way to really prove that that's what's happening. Is there?
hmm Um, I think it amounts to educating yourself, understanding the issue of like reading these books.
Hmm.
I'm no expert. I can't provide a step-by-step plan of how to not be a racist, but there's definitely books out there like
Damn, I was really hoping.
yeah, I know. But just by allying yourself and by kind of calling out um, microaggressions, when you see that happening, just make sure everyone's treated with respect. Um, is a good place to start.
Why does that seem so hard sometimes? I feel like for most of my life I had been seeing or experiencing not like experiencing directly, but I've been uh seeing other people do or say things that are racist, and maybe I didn't understand at the time, but even now, like when I could when I see that happen, it's so hard for me to call people out. Like, it's hard for me to stand up and just say like, "Hey, that's wrong." I've been working to do better, and I have done it a couple times, and it just creates these awkward, intense situations that I feel like I can now handle, but I couldn't before. And so I wonder how we can really cultivate that, how we can really help society um, call out these microaggressions and stuff like that with in a way that we'll actually move on and grow from it. Because I guess the thing that I see a lot and that I'm worried about is calling someone racist and then silencing them instead of saying, "Hey, what you did or what you said was racist." I think like I'm not going to accept that. Because that gives them the opportunity to grow and change rather than saying, "Oh, you are a racist now. Everything you do from now on is what a racist person does because you are a racist." So I guess that's one of the things that I'm trying to do in order to make a change. But in a way, I'm worried that it's not enough. I'm worried that maybe a black friend of mine would say like, "Wow, you're buddying up with racists." Because you're not just completely denying and rejecting them. But I sort of believe that that's how we have to change, is that we have to be able to call out acts and behaviors of racism and systemic racism, systems of racism, and change those rather than personifying racism and then just trying to, get rid of that person and being like, "Look at that, racism gone. We're good."
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it's the same issue as, no, not the same issue, but it's a similar issue to the misinformation campaigns that we're seeing on the internet. Is you try to block them from posting on one platform, they go and create a new platform, and they it seems to foster radicalization rather than
100%. It causes it to fester.
Yeah, we can't chase them out of our public space or our public discourse because they just have their own conversation somewhere else. Like it's not like we ended the issue there. We just postponed it and kind of concentrated it.
I like that because I mean that's something that Joe Rogan will say. Is he's like the only way to combat bad speech is with good speech. You have to hear what they're saying so that you can tell them, "Look, this is where you're wrong. This is where you have this misunderstanding." There's actually this Joe Rogan podcast with I think his name's Daryl Davis, and he's this jazz musician who has converted like hundreds of KKK members and got them to leave the organization. And it sounds amazing. It's like, holy shit, how did you do this? And the bottom line is that he befriended them. He got to know them. And then when they were talking and saying like messed up shit, he would just call them out and be like, "Well, actually, that's not right." Or like, "Have you thought about it this way?" And that's what changed them. Like he's talking about one instance where he was in a car with this guy, and he was talking about like, "Oh yeah, all black people are criminals." And he's like, "Well, I'm not a criminal." And he's like, "Oh, well, you're primed for it. Like your genetics make it so that you're more likely to become a criminal." Ooh. And then he's like, "Okay, I guess." He's like, "Well, then you are more genetically primed to be a serial killer, because name a black serial killer." And the guy couldn't do it. And he's like, "Oh, so you're a serial killer?" And he's like, "Well, no, I'm not. I'm not a serial killer." And he's like, "Well, you're primed for it." And that flip flop for the guy just made him realize like, "Oh, what am I doing? Like, I can't put people in boxes like this and try and create them in my mind and say that that's what they are." And it's like that's just what we have to do. We have to see where people are saying things that are stupid or that are just misinformed and ignorant, and we have to show them what that would actually mean and what that actually does mean and what that's causing in society. And then it gives them the opportunity to change.
Yeah, I love that you said like he befriended them. Like that's the big like shocker. Like whoa,
right?
And it circles back to the whole vegetable conversation. Like, it's
Hmm.
simple. It's just your vegetables, guys. You just got to eat them.
Right? That's it. I love that because it is simple. It's like how do you get rid of hate? And it's like love. It's like, oh well, that's too simple. No, 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 no. We need we need some more crazy, strange answers. Are you sure it doesn't include bombs?
Right. Oh man, seriously. It's like we got to throw at least $1 billion at it. Maybe then.
Yeah, exactly. And you got to be able to make $1 billion from it.
Right.
That means it's a good solution. That's what's valuable in our society.
Speaking of that, I
Hmm.
loved in your last episode when you were talking about resource-based.
Economies.
Yeah, resource-based economies. And what I
Hmm.
like about that specifically is that it would inevitably lead to geographic kind of control of the economy, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I think that this is such a difficult concept to explain to people that it's an actual issue, but like wealth and value is being siphoned off of our local communities. It's being siphoned out
Oh, yeah.
constantly. And what a resource-based economy would do is take it would give the control back to the people who live in this on the land and use the land and benefit from using it correctly, or
And who understand it fully.
exactly, yeah. And so you know I I really liked that about your last podcast.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But I actually like how you said that because I didn't really think of it as giving as inevitably leading to geographic control. I was just sort of like, oh yeah, it gets rid of this imaginary concept that there can, of money where there's just infinite, make us think that there's infinite resources. It just forces us to realize, oh, the world is finite. We need to act in a way that we are
Mhm.
sustainably cultivating our resources. And then, but that idea that it would sort of give that sort of geographic autonomy is cool because I did like we think about how if all of these resources and the cultivation of these resources are being maintained and controlled by people who just see it as a number or as a product that just
Mhm.
needs to be consumed by a specific market, they can't understand fully how to cultivate that. They have to rely on all the people in that area cultivating those resources in order to, like you said, siphon it and then invest it elsewhere.
Mhm.
So that's super cool. I like that. I'm so glad you listened.
Yeah. I was listening to a audiobook that was basically a compilation of texts and data from Noam Chomsky's uh, documentary Requiem for an American Dream,
Mm,
and there's one discussion in that book that really stuck with me, which is that we're facing a similar issue that the original colonists were with the British Empire, which
mm,
is basically taxation without representation. But in
hmm.
this case, it's not an ocean that divides us; it's just wealth.
Oh, I've heard this before.
Oh, you have? Okay, awesome, awesome. I just it really just makes you think in terms of class, and like we are the working class and they are them. Like those like
Hmm.
40 people, like it, like the fun bus, like Russell Brand calls it.
Yes.
Like all the richest people in the
The
world are just on
bejeweled
this bus.
one.
Yeah. And really it's just like they're really far away from us, guys. Like they don't live with
Hmm.
us, they don't share the
Yeah.
same water that we do, and you
Hmm.
look at the same trees and use the same parks. They're just over there, and they're
Yeah.
as trapped as we are, 100%.
Yeah. I think that's the hard thing to see because we're in a society and a culture that really requires us to see them as sort of this pinnacle of being that we should aspire to achieve, rather than understanding that they're also trapped within this system and also um, having having the same or having similar problems
Hmm.
as a result of this system.
So maybe we should try to befriend them, like that
Yeah.
guy you were talking about. Just say like, hey, I'm not a lazy I don't know. I don't know how that
Yeah.
conversation would go, but like,
I don't know either, but I think it really does have to start with kindness, right? It really does have to, because like it's so easy for me to say, like, because when I think about capitalism and I'm just like, oh, it's so easy for me to get to this point where it's like, oh, we just need to round up the capitalists and behead them, and then all of our problems will go away, right? But it's not true. Obviously, like it has to use that same template as Daryl Davis, where we have to befriend them and say,
mhm,
look, you cannot infinitely plunder this world for resources for your own individual gain. And you cannot plunder wealth without spreading it to the people that are directly responsible for the wealth that you've accumulated. Like
mm,
I feel like if we can actually have these conversations with those people, that's the only way we can actually change it. But the problem is that in order to get into those inner circles, you got to be a part of the system that they're in.
mhm.
So the hard part is trying to actually make that conversation happen and organizing our societies in a way that that conversation can happen.
Right, absolutely. And yeah, you have to imagine that these people that like have these roles of like supreme owner of, North America, right? Like whoever that
Hmm.
like super rich guy is, you have to imagine that he's like sweating. Like he is
Yeah.
so terrified. Like imagine being Jeff Bezos. Like oh my
Oh,
gosh, I would like
I
go nuts.
yeah, you couldn't trust anyone. You'd every interaction you would have would have to be a financial one because you really couldn't spend time with anyone unless they're on par with you financially and think that they're not just trying to get you, use you for your money. He's just got this giant target on his back. I
Yeah.
cannot imagine what that would be like.
Right, and Russell Brand talks about how that's part of the reason that the private security industry is so
Oh
lucrative.
yeah.
Yeah, it's
Hmm.
just because it's just how do you maintain power by whatever means necessary. I'm going to use my
Yep.
power to just keep it. I'm like a dragon,
Yeah.
like Smaug.
Exactly. And then we influence the governmental structures to make sure that they are prioritizing maintaining my power and influence because property rights are more important than human rights, huh?
Right, right, man. Ah, I I've been thinking about this for like the since I texted you.
Hmm.
I've thought of so many things to talk to you about.
Yeah.
So many. Um, including okay. What was the paradoxes? The paradox of
Oh yeah.
consciousness. Right, right. Okay. So
Oh yeah.
do you want to hear about that?
I do. I do want
Okay.
to hear about that. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So uh, I was trying to reconcile free agency and predetermination. Right.
Ooh, yeah.
Predeterminism.
A lovely concept.
Right. Right. So and basically what I figured out. Well, no. The the only thing that made sense to me was that if you have these two fundamentally opposing concepts or explanations of existence, that
Hmm.
they have to be the same, and that doesn't make
Yeah.
any yeah, it doesn't make any sense until uh, you think about how until you realize that paradoxes are kind of the fundamental building blocks of everything, of reality,
Yeah.
or at least of reality as we can see understand it, because we are consciousness, right?
Yeah.
And so I kind of took that thought and I realized that in order for that to work, we'd have to remove time as a constant, which is kind
Hmm.
of a big leap, but the idea
Well,
is mhm,
oh, I was gonna say I think that's a necessary leap. And I also think when we look at like quantum physics and just kind of the idea that in reality or with quantum physics, we kind of understand that everything is actually all happening at once. And then like the collapse of linear time is just us perceiving this individual moment, which is requiring everything preceding it. But when we look at, obviously, I'm no quantum physicist, so I don't fully
right,
understand it. But like when the double slit experiment and how they kind of understand that we see like the particle is both in two places at a time, and what they kind of conclude from that, at least as far as I understand, is that all potentialities and all potentialities are existing at any time, and that the experienced experience is
Mhm.
simply just that one potentiality being manifested.
Right. Yeah.
So I think it's possible to transcend that linear time.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's and that there's the paradox, right? That
Hmm.
something requires our participation in order to be actualized, or in order for it to be determined, right? Like
Hmm.
we did determine, we are the predeterminism in that scenario, right?
Yes.
So uh what I and time as a concept, like we already, or time as a constant, I should say, is already kind of
Mhm.
debunked because Einstein, right? The theory of
Yeah.
relativity.
Yeah.
And so basically, I need you to kind of take a journey with me here.
Okay, that's fine. I'm so excited.
All right, so you have to imagine an infinity loop,
Hmm.
right? And on either end of this infinity loop, you kind of have the apex of the curve, right? And so at you have to think that each point at the apex of each of these curves is two ultimately opposing concepts, right? And so
Hmm.
an illustration of that would be this. I think the easiest illustration, or maybe just the most relevant one, is the self and the non-self.
Mm.
The self being anything that's you, or something, anything that you can relate to, or an extension of yourself.
Or
And
identify with.
right, yeah, identify with. That's part of your definition. And then the non-self being, generally speaking, everything else, all of
Hmm.
everything, which would be also, if you believe that you have free agency, would be predeterminism, right?
Hmm.
So, and then the thing is that at the apex of at these curves on either end of the infinity loop, they are the same thing,
Hmm.
because they can't actually exist together, because the only difference between them is that there is no difference between them, right? They
They
have,
require each other to be defined.
yeah, exactly, co-origination.
Hmm.
Now, the reason it's an infinity loop is that as you kind of follow this curve back in towards the center, they're interacting with each other. They begin to influence each other, and
Hmm.
you have to imagine here, it's not two-dimensional, it's three-dimensional, and that the dimensionality of the relationship increases. So
Mm.
you have, because on either end of this infinity loop is the purest form of either thing, which is virtually nothing, because they can't exist without each other.
Ooh,
But
I like that.
and at the center of this infinity loop is the instantaneous moment that is experienced by consciousness.
Ooh, I like that a lot. So I guess, oh, I gotta wrap my brain around it though. Um, because that sort of that idea that these two things, these two opposites have to exist together, because they are, the co-origination to
Mhm.
define them. The only way we can define them is by understanding both parts of it.
Right.
That's something that Alan Watts talks about all the time.
Awesome.
Um, and so that's kind of how I'm trying to portray it and understand it in my mind, because he always talks about like the nature of black and white, and how black implies white and white implies black, because you can never actually have one or the other. They have to be in tandem in order for you to understand either of them.
Mhm.
So when you sort of like bring it to determinism versus free will, I like the idea that those two concepts actually engage with each other because they're the same thing. You
Mhm.
know, I guess, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And you have to be thinking outside of time, linear time, and
Yeah,
which is which is really impossible, but it's a good
because our
effort.
brains are constructed and coordinated by linear time, so it's
Yeah.
pretty hard for us to transcend that.
Right. But so what I do is I imagine a collision, okay? Because you have the past
Mm,
and the future colliding together, and
ooh,
for whatever reason that helps me kind of think outside of linear time, because time exists. It's not like anything can exist independent of time, especially not consciousness. But
Hmm.
time is more like a source of energy, like gravity, or not energy, but it's like a force, like gravity, or
Hmm.
it's part of the fabric of this relationship. It's not.
Hmm.
It doesn't dictate the relationship.
Yeah, I think that's definitely like the conflation there, right? Is that we think that sort of reality is dependent upon time rather than, would you say time is dependent upon reality?
Um, time is dependent as is as much dependent on reality as everything else is.
Mm,
Time is the same as like a cup. It's just a concept. It is only its
yeah.
relationship to anything else.
Interesting. Okay. I like that.
It's so
So, oh, sorry, go on.
it's sort of just realizing that the lens in which you view reality is also comprised of reality. And
Yeah.
so it's more of like a recycling kind of loop.
Ooh, okay. I like that. I think that's kind of an interesting concept for people. Uh, I think it's easy for us to think that we are observing objective reality rather than us being reality trying to coordinate and construct reality.
Yeah, like we're visitors. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a constant. I'm not a constant. You're not a constant,
No.
I like to do this when I'm feeling particularly good about myself, because that's always a problem. Is that I think about who I was yesterday, and I think I have the same relationship with everyone on this planet as I do with the person that I was yesterday.
Yeah.
Like, and which is that it's an arbitrary distinction, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a different person today. I'm a different person now. I'm reborn
Yeah.
every moment. And there's no, and this is why I have a difficult time talking about this or even writing about it, is because there's no application. It's more
Yeah.
about a beautiful description of consciousness. And like, it's
Mm-hmm.
not going to change anything, but it feels good to me to have a comprehensive understanding of it,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's a paradox. Like, I honestly
Yeah.
enjoy that, like the Buddha said, sometimes it's not about the solution, it's about the contemplation.
Yeah, I like that. And I feel like I have like just had like haunted nights where I've sat there and I'm like, oh my God, is everything determinism? Like, am I really just like controlled by all the molecules and environmental factors around me and there's actually no true free will? Or am I, or trying to like decide between that?
Hmm.
And it's actually like this show Devs that kind of made me rethink that interaction. I don't know
Hmm.
if you've seen it,
Mm-mm.
but yeah, the concept is just that there's this tech company that built this supercomputer that was capable of collecting every like infinite data points and has collected so much data over the history of this universe that it could actually, with complete accuracy, predict the future because it's run on this premise of determinism that everything in the universe is just cause and reaction, cause and effect.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, I don't want to spoil it, but essentially, there comes to this part where it's like they've watched the simulation that plays out and they're like, look, because this has collected infinite data points, this is exactly what's going to happen. But then by by viewing that, the protagonist is able to transcend it because they gain this awareness that like elevates them from that system, and then they enact free will and then
Hmm.
make a choice. And
Huh.
so like that show just like fucked me up for a while because I'm
Hmm.
like, man, is this universe really deterministic, or do I actually have free will? And I sort of came to this conclusion of it's both, because I'm comprised of all sorts of types of determinism, that's just beyond my consciousness. I cannot comprehend all of the things that are occurring in my body right now to make sure that I don't just keel over and die. But every time I gain a level of awareness, I also gain this opportunity to make a choice. Um, and maybe it's still a limited choice that's like still deterministic in some senses, but I do believe that like consciousness actually holds weight, that it actually is like this collapse of that determinism, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's what defines determinism, because
Mm,
if you know the 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 only reason the concept of predeterminism exists is because there's a question that free will exists. They define each
yeah,
other. They drive each other. That's why they have to be the
yeah,
same thing. So if predeterminism is all that there is, then everything's inevitable. But it doesn't mean anything. It's like saying, does anything exist? Uh,
yeah.
yeah, I guess so.
Okay,
Because
I like that. I like that just that conceptualization of it, where it's like free if everything is deterministic and then free will is the definition of free will is comprised of that determinism, they actually have to be the same thing
Mhm.
essentially.
Yeah, yeah, and like I know a lot of people are going to be dissatisfied with that because
Hmm.
they think in the term in they, there's no control and there's no way to apply that. But
Mm.
for me, the paradox proves the exception proves the rule, right? The mere and like you said with quantum physics, right? The what basically what that demonstrated to me is that there's a blind spot in in the idea that everything can be measured against a constant. Like
Yeah.
empiricism doesn't always work. There is always
Hmm.
conflicting states of existence that you can't reconcile. And those things
Yeah,
are actually why reality in the universe is so cool.
I love that.
um,
I love that.
I also wanted to just kind of because it's a really difficult concept to grasp. So I wanted to um, bring another kind of illustration, which is there was a quote that I read that was the perfect map of a place is the place itself.
Mm.
And like you were talking about with the devs, the idea that they created a computer that could perfectly map all probabilities and predict everything, right? What that means is that the computer has become the universe. Be,
Ooh.
because it's the perfect if it's a perfect representation, then it's a duplication. It's identical.
Okay,
And so uh
because a
when
perfect representation can only be perfect if it is that thing.
yeah, because otherwise there are discrepancies. You're going to be
Yeah.
like, these are different. And so, I'm not saying that it's impossible to create a computer that simulates all of the universe, but if it is possible, then that means that computer simply create that
It's
the universe is self-perpetuating because it's a part of the universe that it occupies.
Oh, that's the yeah. I love that.
Right.
That's actually really cool.
Thank you. Thank you. So, and uh, to think about it that way, like if a map is a perfect map of a place is the place itself. Basically, any attempt at explaining or uh, kind of drawing
Categorizing.
a conclusion using a single constant to draw a conclusion is always going to have a blind spot. It's always going to have irregularities or conflicting pieces. And I think a really good example of that is a black hole.
Mm.
Have you read any or have you watched any of Kurzgesagt's videos?
Mm-mm.
They're those little animated videos that talk about like what would happen if the sun went out or the Earth stopped rotating. You should definitely check it out. It's like right in your wheelhouse.
Okay.
I'll
What
send
was
you a
it
link.
called again? Oh, okay.
Kurzgesagt. It's difficult to pronounce. I'm probably pronouncing it incorrectly.
Yeah,
But
send me a link.
okay, cool. So a black hole, which I see as like a blind spot of space and time,
Hmm.
because as you know, it once you pass the singularity. Oh my gosh, I totally blanked on the term. Um, the event horizon. Once you pass the event horizon, uh, the gravity is so strong that light gets sucked into the black. Even if something's traveling at the speed of light, it can't escape the gravitational pull of a black hole. And so the reason that that's that's why a lot of people talk about black holes being like a wormhole, like a portal to another dimension, because
Hmm.
basically, how do you have the law of conservation of energy when you also have this enormous sucking thing that destroys everything that it comes into contact with? And
Wow.
there's basically three theories of what happens to the information that a black hole consumes. The first one is that it's destroyed, which
Mm.
is like, all right, boring.
It's done, right?
Yeah. The second one is that it's somehow stored in think of it as like an encrypted hard drive where it's
Mm.
there, but like you can never ever access it ever, and there's no way to get it. It's essentially destroyed, but stored. And then the third theory that the Kurzgesagt Scott video explained was that you have to imagine a room, and you're putting all of this stuff into this room. Eventually, it's going to be full, and you won't be able to put any more stuff into it. A black hole, because of its strong gravitational pull, will continue putting stuff into the room. It'll compress the stuff so much that the atomic structure of the matter becomes it disincorporates, and
Mm.
it becomes not what it is, and then some. Like, it continues compressing it down. And so the information is, this is the third theory, the information that is consumed by this black hole is conserved in it's basically transformed, and it's in a holographic state. So it's compressed from a three-dimensional state into a two-dimensional state along the surface of this black hole.
Holy shit.
So what's cool about that is that you're basically breaking the laws of physics. It's that blind spot I was telling you about. It's basically a breakdown of our understanding of how the universe works.
Hmm.
Um, and I
That's
see
insane. Holy cow.
I see the same thing. Like, I see a relationship between black holes and quantum physics, because at either end, you're like, here's all that we know, and at the end of either of these things, the biggest, most impactful things in the universe, like a black hole is at the center of our galaxy, like we're revolving around it now, and then quantum physics, the smallest things that can exist that we know and understand, they're both breaking the rules. They're both paradoxical.
Wow. Man. Okay, that's like blowing my mind right now. So I'm one thing that I kind of thought, and maybe it's not really in that same sphere, but like all of this information, all of this stuff, I guess, that's getting collected within this black hole, and if it is really being transformed or pressed into this smaller space, could that potentially be that the dense, what we understand is like the dense hot state of matter that preceded the Big Bang, is that like possibly the birth of a new universe, or are those like separate things?
Um, I just think that we have our senses, like mainly electromagnetic energy, right? Like light and sound
Hmm.
and all of that. And I think that we're just exploring the limitations of that. Like, we only have
Mm,
the tools that we have. I don't think
yeah,
that's the limit of our universe. I don't think there is a limit to our universe.
yeah,
It's just um, it's just the blind spot. We all have one. It's just
yeah.
there, and I think it's all the more beautiful for that reason,
Hmm. Yeah,
because
because there's like infinite experiences to discover, I guess.
yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh! And in the last episode, you talked about where you were saying how um, why why have multiple universes? Why have multiple dimensions? Why can't there be everything existing in the same universe?
Yeah,
Well, if a universe exists independent of time, or if time is not a constant, that's true. You basically have Murphy's law
yeah.
crisscrossing throughout everything, backwards and forwards and sideways and up and down. like Murphy's law can exist. It's just because we're traveling, and the best way to describe that is, you know how in physics class they teach you like you're on a train, you throw a ball up in the air, the ball looks like it's only going up and down, but to somebody standing off the
It's
train,
also going 60 miles per hour.
yeah, relative motion,
Hmm.
right? Yeah, that's all that is. Just and
Hmm.
that's a simple enough concept to understand. But yeah, that's what we're experiencing is like everything seems inevitable and everything seems constant because we're all traveling at the same speed. If we were
Oh,
if we were traveling in time backwards, man, everything would look totally different. It,
oh, dude, that's insane.
right?
Oh, that's cool. We're all just having sort of a consistent experience of time, and that's what's creating this singular experience rather than that, like I was trying to describe, is like infinite everything happening all at once,
Right, like parallel
according to my consciousness.
universes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Parallel universes. Let's talk about like perpendicular universes, you know? Like,
Yeah.
right? You know, like why does everything have to be traveling the same direction? I think that's a really really common like assumption that everyone makes.
Hmm. That's so interesting. Yeah, and so that's why it's kind of hard to grasp these concepts of just like all things happening at once as infinite potentialities, because we really are only capable of understanding or perceiving uh, this linear experience.
Yeah. And you know, there's no application to that. Like you're not going to save the world being like, "Hey man, like there could be a person traveling like perpendicular to us in time." but
Yeah,
but
but I think
it's beautiful. There's some
it
beauty
is
to it.
beautiful, and it really like by increasing that perspective, it allows us the opportunity to increase perspectives in more places in our life, in our lives. So that's kind of that's why I like talking about these big abstract concepts, because even though it's not practical and I can't go and change the world with it, it's just helping me practice taking on a new perspective and understanding that like there is more outside of my immediate experience, and that I can draw from that
Right.
to actually make meaningful changes in our lives.
Absolutely. And you know, like we talked about a lot of social issues here, and
Hmm.
they seem insurmountable. They seem ridiculous to try and combat as an individual.
Yeah.
But that's like the tip of the iceberg. Social issues with beings that are essentially identical to us. Like
Yeah.
let's talk about living in a way where your consciousness expands to the size of the universe. Or let's talk about
Yeah.
experiencing time backwards, you know? Because those are all also constructs that we've
Yeah.
created. And if our, like Russell Brand says, if my reality is a construct and I can change it if it's not conducive to my well-being,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah,
that's
and I like how you say that, because like by putting it in that perspective of like it makes those social issues more manageable.
hmm yeah, yeah. It's just we're you know, and I think that we are all the same person. Kurzgesagt did an episode about the egg, which you should watch that right after we're done here
Uh
because
huh.
it oh my god, it is one of the most beautiful YouTube videos I've ever seen, and I've seen
Nice.
some good ones. And basically, it talks about reincarnation into the past. So a person can
Mm.
die and be reincarnated as like the example they use is a Chinese woman who's also a rice farmer. Like this
Hmm.
guy in America dies, is reincarnated in the past, and the idea is that the same entity, the same consciousness, is reincarnated into every single person that's ever existed.
Mm. I like that. And
Yeah.
not just, and in a way, it sort of doesn't even have to be reincarnated into human consciousness, but it would be reincarnated into every level of consciousness, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Even maybe the experience of being a rock.
yeah. The video doesn't take it that far, but like I said, if you take time as what it is, which is just a relationship between things, you could
Mm.
be a rock, or you could be I like to think that like you could be an entire species, right?
All at once.
Yeah,
Ooh, I like that.
because DNA, man, it's all just information. It's
Hmm.
you know like, and DNA still weirds me out sometimes. Like,
Yeah.
you ever think about DNA and just think like, this is just code for who I am and how I
Yeah.
am.
And
Uh,
how I am programmed to respond to my environment.
yeah.
It is super weird that it's just like a collection of, and it's like, especially that it's just like a collection of the same, like what, 4 molecules or something,
Yeah, yeah.
or
Um,
Gattaca.
amino acids. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Proteins. But yeah, like because I can. It's pretty easy for me. Like when I read about early Earth and like the creation of life, or theories on how life was created, or not created, but
Hmm.
how it happened. It's easy for me to think that like okay, yeah, like protein fragments and like amino acids formed and like those could have bonded together and those could have started self-perpetuating, but DNA is where I that's where I think that like maybe aliens were involved because like how does
How did we
DNA
get this
just
code?
yeah form, man, like millions of data points. That's the one thing, but I probably just lost all credibility to our audience here. Sorry,
It's okay.
guys.
Aliens, aliens have to have some part in this story of the universe. I got it.
We are aliens to
We are a type of alien. We have to be.
yeah. Awesome, dude.
Awesome, dude. I think we'll probably cut it off here.
Mhm.
Um, Thank you so much, man. This has been amazing. It's gonna happen more often, 100%.
Oh yeah.
Uh, and I really appreciate you reaching out to set this up because I've loved it.
Well, thank you. You inspired me. That's why I wanted to do this. You're an inspiration.
Hell yeah, thank you, man. All
Thanks.
right.